Hey, welcome back to the Papers Podcast, where the number needed to listen, and in this case to watch, is 1. We look at the world's health professions education literature, argue about them, and other things to try and help you get through your day and your career. So today, the crew is all here. You can see them. We're live. John's had a shower. Linda's had her hair done, and Lara's like rip-roaring ready to go. It's actually Lara's paper. So why don't we just throw right to Lara and see what she's talking about today? Take it away.
No, we have to say hello to everybody. They have
but
to say hi.
You can see everybody. Why do you have to say hello? It's like, there's
Hi,
John.
Linda. How are you?
Lara, I'm fine. What did you do today?
I've had a good day. I've been working on my paper. Hey, John, how are you?
You're wasting tape.
There's somebody right now who's jogging, who's not watching this video, and is listening to this podcast and saying, I'm canceling my subscription of this free stuff.
Or they're like, go Varpio. It could go either direction. Either they're in or they're out. I don't know.
Well, they can always be cut, you know. I mean, we have an editor and...
They could edit all of this out. It could happen.
Yeah.
And that's okay if Samuel wants to do that. Inga problem.
Simon?
Okay.
Samuel will sort it out.
Because he's a king and we don't deserve him. Can I just put that out there?
Way
like
to
sincerely?
Suck up to the
Well,
guy.
yeah, because he's nice to me. Anyway, okay. The paper is in the journal Medical Teacher, and it is called Medical Teachers' Identity Learning During Major Curriculum Renewal, a Landscape of Practice Perspective. Now, the angle that they take in this paper is really unique, and I want to just put a little bit of a highlight under it. As we've seen lately, curricula are changing, and that's not new, right? Curricula need evolution, they need to evolve, they need to change in order to stay current. That makes sense. But what we're seeing right now in curricula renewal is that curricula are shifting to take on a social responsibility, a critical consciousness perspective. And that's really important, but it does something, right? Because when we take on that perspective, we've changed the role of the educator. And so we're shifting their role, which used to be primarily perhaps conveyor of knowledge, to one that is also simultaneously social conscious agent of change. And at a minimum, you know, we're asking these people to navigate social context. We're asking them to teach learners how to navigate difficult social contexts. But that's sort of the minimum. There are other expectations that are also expected. And so teachers are starting to be talked about as social advocates, as agents for change. And as the authors write, this can have real impact on clinician educators' sense of identity. They write, and I wanted to read this verbatim, I quote, "Should medical teachers perceive the requisite changes as incongruent with their existing professional identities, they may experience conflicting feelings about the advantages of incorporating a critical agenda and the implications thereof for their teaching role." So this paper is all about the possibility of identity dissonance because of curriculum renewal, which is not necessarily something we think about as having that kind of impact. So I'm curious to know what you all think of this. You have been involved in many a curricula renewal. Did it push on your identity? What was it like to move towards this critical consciousness? Did you see others struggling with it? Let's go, Linda, Jason, John.
So I guess it would count as a curriculum change as we revise our well-known competency framework, which is done every 10 years or so. The current one is being revised with a view to social consciousness. And it is causing some identity questioning and also some challenges, I believe, for some of the individuals involved who I think we have to remember, though, that a curriculum ain't going to change the world. Just like any part of a curriculum ain't going to change the world. And one of the challenges is putting critical consciousness and social awareness into the curriculum doesn't necessarily mean that everything is going to get better, society is going to change. It may be a small factor only.
This idea that people struggle with their identity when you change a curriculum totally resonates with me. I've seen it all the time. Just building on Linda's example, when we first rolled out CanMeds, I had people write to us to say, yesterday I was medical expert. Today I'm 1/7 the medical expert. So that was an example of how people were trying to rebuild their identity. And then 10 years later, they said, don't even change the diagram. That is my identity now. So I totally get that. I was really struck that this paper isn't really about critical consciousness, I don't think. I think it's about any change that is a threat to a teacher's identity. that was my take on this. I think this applies to any transformative change, something that's not superficial.
People hate change. That's pretty clear. Change management is really hard to do, and teachers aren't special. And what we hold on to is probably idiosyncratic for all of us, but there are certain things that have stood up for me. If you've ever been a part of an exam committee, every time there's any kind of a change to the exam blueprint, it's a sense of, well, back in my day, things are way harder. We walked uphill both ways to school in the snow, et cetera, et cetera.
Across the lake. Yeah.
But there's also a sense of what is the history of who we are and what we have committed to, because it's often a volunteerism element that means there's something really important that's drawn people into these roles, particularly into teaching roles. They're not always obligatory, although in some contexts they may. And so the one that stands out for me is resistance to the competence movement, because teachers said, hey, we're teaching for excellence. We want a high standard. We want peers and colleagues that are excellent. And it's a language interpretation, and language is so fluid and so contextualized that specifically the idea of competence to many teachers that reached out to me was, why are we decreasing the standard or the threshold that we're building? And the argument, of course, in CBME, there's no attempt to decrease a standard or threshold, but it was the language that made people reticent and a natural challenger to curricular renewal, which to all of the proponents of CBME and other types of competence types of movements was to say, let's really enhance and grow the educational experience so that we can maintain excellence, but we used a language that people misinterpreted. And so curriculum change is never in this, it's rare to see the vast majority super excited. It's always a sense of, oh, change, I don't like it, so I'm going to be resistant.
So, what's really interesting about all your comments, they really, they tee up the conversation beautifully about this paper. But one of the other things I have to just tell you is that one of the reasons I picked this paper is because I was working with someone recently who was interested in studying curriculum renewal and those sorts of things. This is an area in our literature where there's a lot of space for work to be done. So I think, your comments, we're going to get into this paper, but I would love to encourage our listeners that if they're looking for a topic for study and for inquiry, curriculum renewal is just ripe for all kinds of different questions. And this paper is a beautiful example of the kind of orientation you might take that may not seem completely obvious, right? You might think that the obvious question would be evaluating the program and those sorts of things, but this is a different orientation. So with that, we are going to do the super fastest fly through the methods, because I'm dying to get to results and discussion, because the way they use theory is like, oh, it's so nice. But okay, so really quickly through the methods. The data are from a 4-year-long multi-institutional study carried out in South Africa, and they're studying the range of understandings that educators bring to teaching as they interpret the alternative philosophies and practices of the curriculum, including this integration of critical consciousness. For the record, they're going to get my bonus mark for telling me that their qualitative study was carried out, yes, John, from an interpretive paradigm. Love them for it. It's a good bonus mark. They had 26 participants. And interestingly, right, they were primarily biomedical scientists and clinicians involved in the classroom or clinical teaching. They held 9 focus groups, and during those conversations, the participants indicated that there were important voices that were not part of the sampling. They were not part of the study. So what the researchers did is they did 3 additional interviews to make sure that those perspectives were then added into the data set. The scholars did, using Brown and Clark's thematic analysis, they did their analysis and they brought theory into the process after inductively analyzing the data. So they did the inductive analysis to develop their themes or their codes and preliminary themes. And that's when they brought in their theory. I have no real critique of these methods, so I'm going to open up for you for quick comment. Let's go Jason, Linda, John.
Your Honor, that's badgering and leading the witness with a quick comment. There's no problems.
Yeah, and that's fine, because this ain't a court of law. Mm-hmm.
So my tiny quibble, and this is very tiny because I follow the logic, but if you're a frontline clinician educator, it was a bit dense, speaking as a dense person, it was a bit dense to follow along, for them to build up their logic with these 2 theories and then bring me to where they landed. It took me a while to read. I read it several times in order to make a connection to where they were going. Mm-hmm. It wasn't obvious. Mm-hmm. So it could have been a little bit more elegant language, but their methodology, I had no complaint.
Yeah, I agree with you, Jason. Same thing for me. I suspect they were asked to cut words down, and they maybe took out some of the logical links that then left us sort of struggling a little bit. That was it.
I knew you loved this paper because it took them 3 pages to get past their conceptual framework. And I knew that
God
somewhere
love them. God
you were
love them.
running laps in your office, screaming and high-fiving the imaginary friends you have. Because
They
if
are my friends. They don't know this yet. They are, though. We're going to
You're
wait till I meet
imaginary
them.
because not many people can love you the way all 3 of us love you, and yet despite your conceptual framework addiction. So, you know what? Hats off to this author group. They have a really tight method section. I want to highlight a couple things. First, they give us no context. So they call, it's a virtual fist bump to you, Varpio, for choosing an author group from South Africa. We're trying to really be geographically inclusive, and I really appreciate the context there. But we have no context for what Stellenbosch is going through. But in fact, it's not just Stellenbosch. It sounds like there is a number of schools involved in this.
Yeah.
The specifics I don't know about. And what does the actual change in this social accountability, this critical consciousness mean? I kind of can maybe imagine what that is, but there's nothing in terms of just a framework. There's a reference to one of the lead author's papers, which I took just a look at the reference rather than pulling up. But I would expect at least a single paragraph saying, here's what's changing. Here's what's that threat. Here's what the opportunity is.
Yeah.
And moreover, we don't actually have any reflexivity about who the authors are and how they're going to see this. And there's some assumptions there. I'm sure from all the rigor that's there that it's all fine. And I'm not worried about it. But if we didn't see all the other pieces there, you might say, well, just help me frame this. I need to understand what's the intervention, etc.
I have an important question. So are we allowed to use the word moreover? Because I'm not sure that's an allowed word. It seems like kind of hoity-toity.
Hoity-toity?
Elbow patch word.
But I want to end on a high note.
Was that what you wanted to interrupt with, Jason? Like, was that the whole point? God, I love you.
Yeah.
So for me being critical, I want to end on a high note, but I also want to push Varpio's buttons. And I'm going to use this term intentionally. So they did this theoretical triangulation, and that's the inside joke. Lara hates the word triangulation.
I do hate the word triangulation, yeah.
I know. You wrote a little paper with a cobra about it or something like that.
Great paper. I just have to say.
It is a good paper. I'm not sure you're allowed to.
Right?
You can't pump your own paper. It's really nice how they integrate 2 really important theories that enrich what their analysis is going to be. And this is one of the best descriptions of, or one of the best implementations of, I've seen this in a bit of time. So if you're looking at how to integrate theory to see a problem or a concept from multiple perspectives, this is a really great implementation of it. So I'll give them some big my second virtual fist pump this podcast.
Okay. So I agree with you that this is a beautiful example of bringing theory into your study. And so we're going to spend a minute on that in just 1 second. But first, we have to go back to John's comment about context. And I agree because it is a good point. But then one of the things I want to say then is we're all responsible for doing that, right? So because we can't often, there's a set of assumptions that Western perspectives on how training happens is dominant in the literature, right? So maybe one of the things we need to do is start requiring an appendix. And it can be a short appendix. It can be a paragraph where you tell us a little bit about your context, about, what it's like, what residency, what curriculum renewal looks like for you, where you're working, what you're transitioning from and to, and those sorts of things. But then we all have to do that, right? Like when we're looking at studies of professional identity, that means different in Montreal than it does in Philadelphia. So maybe we should all be thinking about that. Everybody agrees?
It's still missing from the paper.
Moving on. Okay.
Not convinced.
No, this is a moreover, not a anyway.
Moreover. Yes, elbow pads. Okay.
Purposely, moreover.
So
if you guys want to borrow my thesaurus, I'm happy to send it to you,
where's
Jason.
Where's the freaking mute button? How do I mute you guys? No. So getting into the results and the discussion, because I'm going to kind of combine them up a bit. In order to do this, though, I'm going to have to take a little detour through some theory, because they really do describe their results through the theory, and it's beautifully done. So please take the time to go download the paper. But in order to do this, I have to give you a very short, very high level review of two theories. So here's the bare bones of what you need to know to read the study. So first, the authors draw on the concept of landscape of practice. And landscape of practice builds on the theory of communities of practice. And I think we're all quite familiar from that. So if a community of practice is a group of people who regularly work and learn together and learn from each other because they care about the same real life problems, then the landscape of practice focuses on how different communities of practice interact and how they depend on each other and how they might even be accountable to each other. So this brings up a concept of knowledgeability. We need to wrestle with knowledgeability necessarily to understand this paper. What you need to know, though, is that the landscape of practice and the communities in there, they have to understand each other. They have to understand how the work in different communities is relevant to each other and how you fit in to that landscape of work. So to do that, Jason, you're just such a problem. What was that? A bunny dropping into a hole? You drew a picture.
There's a theory rabbit hole. You can keep talking. I was just visualizing. It's like the translators, like the people doing ASL. I was doing lava.
Oh, that was the okay. Well, I'm sure our listeners are going to appreciate the fact that we're going into
that was a bunny. I thought it was something more rude. No,
I thought it was a bunny. It was a bunny.
Okay.
Show it to us.
It's a theory rabbit hole.
Theory rabbit hole.
It looks like a button, not a hole. Anyway.
You're welcome. So we're going back into the theory rabbit hole because knowledgeability, to understand how this works and where you are, you need three kinds of identification. You need three things, right? So one is engagement. And engagement encourages participation in the practices and the discourses of the communities to gain experience of what's expected of you. Next is alignment. Alignment requires professionals to coordinate their activities and perspectives with the various communities of practices' expectations for competence. And so they connect to a broader system of values, to a broader discourses of the landscape. And the last one is imagination. And imagination involves, literally, imagining yourself as a professional in this landscape. Who could I be? It's your future self. Okay. So engagement, you got to engage, you have to be aligned, you got to imagine. All right. That summary is for Jason, because now I've asked him to remember three things, because now I have to ask you to remember three more things.
Yeah, I can't. They seem like they're the same thing, just different labels. Very similar labels,
but
same letters.
They're really not.
Just saying.
But that's okay. That's fine. So next, they also use this a theory called teacher identity theory. And again, I have to thank these authors because this is not a theory I was familiar with. So I went on a whole journey and I had a great afternoon. So thank you so much to them. This theory looks at how teachers continuously construct, negotiate, and transform their professional identities in response to changing educational practices. So from this theory's perspective, a major curriculum change is a boundary experience where teachers need to figure out how to function and how to be competent in this new set of expectations. So this theory focuses on sense making, and it says there's four possible outcomes. There's four ways this can turn out for you. One is assimilation. So this is where the teacher is able to fit in. This works for them. This is like a coat that fits, right? So they can assimilate into the expectations into their own frame of reference. Next is accommodation. So accommodation is when a teacher is able to transform their current knowledge and belief and adapt to the new practice, but it's not as natural. They need to accommodate the new situation. Next is tolerance. So when the teacher accepts the new experience, but they continue to use old ways of thinking. So they hold on to their old references. They just tolerate the new. And the last is resistance, right? So this is when we're digging in our heels and saying, I can't do this. This is not who I am. So before I move on, because I want to remember, you have to hold on to 7 things, Jason. I know it's too much. Engagement, alignment, imagination from one theory, and then assimilation, accommodation, tolerance, and resistance from another. Do you have any clarifying questions before we move on? None from Linda?
I actually found both the landscapes of practice one I think is well known. The teacher identity one I think is actually pretty useful.
It is, I think, yeah.
I was really struck that this paper could have also referred to the entire universe of change theories that are relevant to education that are not about identity per se, because there's a lot of overlap there. Nevertheless, straightforward. Just I actually found that the language was like assimilation and accommodation. I just found the language a little bit less accessible.
Yeah, except you're asking for sociology terms to be familiar to, and if you're a sociologist, Wenger, new last name, or Wenger trainer, probably would say this is all fundamental. The only part I would say about their theory, though, is it gets lost in the results. They use it as framing, but then we'll talk about the results in a second. But that richness in that differentiation that you've shared with us, it's pushed down. And they have three big themes, three big domains maybe, and some themes underneath each that doesn't have the same you can't see all of that underneath. It's like the infrastructure of the house. All we see is everything above ground, and we lose everything that's sitting underneath. That'll be one of my comments about the theory.
Okay, well, let's come back to that, because that's a good point, and it's something. Well, we'll come back to that, because I wonder if it's a publishing issue. So the authors of the study start with the idea of engagement, of moving into the curriculum renewal process. And some participants had deep-rooted uncertainty about their identity as a teacher that created real resistance to the curriculum change. In fact, some participants alluded to having identities as clinicians and scientists over their roles as teacher. And they talked about how teaching wasn't even part of their employment contract. So for some, the curriculum renewal highlighted that in the landscape of practice, they lived in the interstitial fluids between the old curriculum and the new curriculum, and between the disciplinary community and the teaching community. They weren't in there, they weren't out, they were sort of in between. And when it came to alignment, to coordinating and connecting their identity with the various communities of practices, systems of belief, participants experienced dissonance between who they were as a content expert and who they needed to be in the new curriculum. And they demonstrated some degree of accommodating. So they tried to accommodate expectations, but there was a lot of tolerance in the results section. Several participants continue to draw on their primary identity as basic scientists and clinicians, and not as teachers. And when it came to imagining the future, I thought that was really cool too. They talked about how they might fit into changing the landscape of practice, but a lot of dialogue and a lot of collaboration. There was a lot of hand-holding that was needed by the leaders to try to bring these teachers into the fold, to modify their ideas of teaching and who they would be in the new curriculum. So for some, it was really hard to imagine this new curriculum and their identity in it. So this is how they took the theories and brought them into their analysis to see how the identities of these teachers changed and were, what they were trying to do with their identities during curriculum change. So since I know you have some thoughts, why don't we go Jason, Linda, John?
I'm curious to hear what other people think. I actually thought that there were two really powerful things about this paper. The first was introducing teacher identity learning, which I thought was actually really useful. I didn't find the Wenger theory as useful for this paper, for these results. That's my take. The results are fantastic. They capture what so many of us experience with our colleagues who wear multiple hats, and their primary identity might be as a scientist. And then they're asked to do something different because they're teaching in a medical curriculum or a nursing curriculum. I think some of these quotes are really powerful. That's worth reading in this paper. As John said, it made it dense because following along the logic between the theory and the results was kind of broken for me. I had to read it several times.
Yeah, I agree with you. I certainly aligned myself with some of the comments and the quotes. My sense is that in the results, they leaned in more heavily to the landscape of practice than to the teacher identity. In fact, the three sections of the results are those first three things that Jason won't remember. But I'm wondering if they could have presented the results in a different way that might have made it clear that they were doing two things. I don't know. Even a table of some sort with a
table would have helped.
With a 4 and a 3 going across and some quotes in there. Having said that, I love this paper. I love the writing. It was hard work to try and get in there and understand it.
I think the results are excellent. I won't reiterate anything that's said here. I would not recommend a table. I think the complexity of what they have, but they can signpost the themes better, because the themes are not actually signposted with a heading or a subheading or even a numeration of the themes. They have these 3 big domains under the landscape of practice, and they talk about the interpretation using the teacher identity theory under each. And so you can see it if you open 2 PDFs side by side. So you have the methods there and then the results on a different page. But that's a lot of work for a reader. And to identify what those themes are a bit of work. My only small little critique, and it's here just because it's one of my pet peeves. They did the classic thing that as a reviewer, I always flag for, please don't do this. The very first line of the discussion is, this is the first, and then to our knowledge, to apply, and then they something. Please don't do that as an author. That's no justification for why to do work. Just because you're the first to do it doesn't mean it's meaningful. There's a lot better articulation as to why or who cares. And please don't use, we're the first to do it as an articulation. A very minor point, but it's a great place for me to jump into one of my little pet peeves.
So thank you all for your comments. I just adore this paper. And you're right there. This is thick research. This is theory informing results and analysis. And it's 2 theories, right? So they had to bring 2 theories, tie them together into a framework, structure it, and then present the results through it. And that's hard work. This is one of those moments where I was like, man, a good diagram might have helped. But this is also a moment when I know that John would have a whole high horse issue about the diagram. And I know I can't draw one. And we just saw that Jason can't even draw a rabbit. So really.
Fair enough.
Fair, right?
That's what ChatGPT is for.
Well, that's a whole other conversation. My other point, though, is that one paper clip I had about this paper, and I thought it was a moment that sort of gave me cause for pause, that so often when I work in the field and when we work together with clinician educators and people in medical education and health professions ed, sometimes I forget that there are people who are in the teaching space, who are doing work, who are teaching future clinicians, who really don't think of themselves as a teacher, who really, that is not why they're there. That's not their purpose. This is an add-on thing. And that really, for me, is an important thing to remember. I can forget that. So thanks for that paper clip to the authors. That helped me. And the only other thing I want to say before we go to our ever dubious rounds of voting is, like, sincerely, Anthea and hold on, I'm going to find the first name. I lost the first name. Mariette. We're friends. They don't know this, but we're really friends, because I just love the way they did this study. I thought it was so intelligent and so well done. So I look forward to hanging out with them. I look forward to the chance when I get to meet them at a conference, because we're going to have a great conversation. Y'all are invited. It will be a rabbit hole of theory, I hope. Anyway, so with that, we're going to move on to our ever dubious round of voting that doesn't mean anything, but we feel the need to do it anyway to keep Jason happy. So first we vote on methods, and there's a scale 1 to 5, and you can give it anything you want. I've often voted sheepadoodle, for instance, on the record. So, let's go Jason, John, and Linda.
Coming off mute. Methods are pretty good. I'm going to give it a 4.
4 for me. I will resist the Varpio urge to add extra points for multiple pages of conceptual frameworks, but 4.
So I'm going to give it a 4. I took off a point because it was really hard to read and actually make sense of, and I then added that point back because they were using conceptual frameworks. So it still comes out to a 4.
And so I'm going to give this paper a 4 plus 1 because they articulated their paradigmatic orientation, making this manuscript a 5. Then we go on to educational impact. Again, same dubious scoring structure. I encourage you to vote with emojis. Let's go Linda, John, then Jason.
I'm not sure what I do with this. It's interesting, but will it really change my practice? No, it's a nice paper I might show to a learner in terms of how to incorporate a paradigmatic orientation. I'd give this a 3+.
I think it really depends who your audience is. I think if you're looking at a general clinician educator audience, this paper will be dense and the so what will be harder to find because you have to mine it a bit yourself. If you're an educational designer, this is probably a 5 because change is hard. Think about people is really what the headline should be. I know a medical teacher probably went with give us a very descriptive title. And so they have a very descriptive title, which kind of buries the so what of their paper. But for an educational designer, this is a 5.
Okay, how about you?
No, that's not how this game works. It's your turn now.
All right, so I'm going to give this a 3. I was trying to think about how I would use this paper. I think this paper is so dense it's not accessible to most audiences that I would interact with. I would reference this paper, though. And actually, the reference list is actually eye-opening for me. It leads me to papers that I didn't know existed from higher ed. I appreciate that. I would use this paper when I'm writing about curriculum change. And as John said, it is really about the impact on people. So for that reason, I'd give it a 3. But I wouldn't bring it out for my med ed fellowship. And it's just too inaccessible for that group.
So I'm going to give this paper a 4 and a unicorn emoji. And with that, a shout out to Eva Piorila from Finland. Eva, thank you so much for spending some time with me the other day and having a great conversation. I learned so much from you. So just a shout out to say thanks. For now, we really appreciate your time listening to us. And if you want to get in touch with us, you can find us on the internet at paperspodcast.com. But if you want to send us an email, and we do read them all, you can reach us at thepaperspodcast@gmail.com. And with that, dear friends, we are now going to sign off. But if you want to get in touch with us, you can always find us on the internet at papers.com. But if you want to get in touch with us via email, we do read them all. You can reach us at thepaperspodcast@gmail.com. And with that, I'll say, talk to you later.
Bye-bye.
Thanks for listening.
Take care, everybody.